Who is democracy? Yes, that title is somehow even worse than the last one. In this episode, I explore the corrosive influence of corporations and extremely wealthy individuals within our so-called democracies. So, I did what anybody would do and used the search engine of my choice. Not Google, thank you very much. And the results came back. Results which, by and large, indicated that lobbying was a good thing. Well, that was a short episode, wasn't it? Everything is okay because my third-party search engine, which still essentially uses Google to return results, said so. That's the level of research I do on this channel and nothing more. Now, while this lobbying malarkey is simple in concept, it is a little more complicated in practice, which is why I'll be referencing this book a lot, Mr. Plishy's Big Colour Book of Corruption. But before we get to the nub of it, I have a story to tell. Picture the scene. Picture it better than the substandard animation shown here, dear viewer. I'm in court before a so-called judge. Judge Beak is asking me why, when I was pulled over by Officer Cobroller, why I didn't make oink oink noises while dousing his patrol car with gasoline and setting it ablaze, but instead put a crisp $1 bill in with my license, registration and proof of insurance that Officer Cobroller asked for. I explained to Judge Beak that using gasoline to burn things was environmentally damaging, not to mention that it would put money into the pockets of Big Fossil. So instead I lobbied Officer Cobroller to let me go. The judge called it bribery, and I was promptly sentenced to watch Noel Edmonds' house party for the next 12 years, which means I'll only get to see about a quarter of it. I don't care if you know who Noel Edmonds is or not, I don't have to appeal to any audience, much like Mr. Edmonds. I just defined what lobbying is in case you weren't quite sure what that last bit was all about. Anyway, before we get to the quick of this episode, I first have to talk about who has their thumb on the scale, so to speak, when it comes to representative democracies. Who has their thumb on the scale and what do they want? Okay, dear viewer, prepare yourself. Here comes a reference like what you'd find on one of those proper videos that discuss politics. Here it is, the quote from a real article entitled Democracy and the Policy Preferences of Wealthy Americans, aka What Does Our Future Food Source Want from the Government? There is good reason to believe that the wealthiest Americans exert more political influence than their less fortunate fellow citizens do. I have to say, I'm not too happy with that quote really. There is good reason to believe isn't quite the objective slam dunk I was hoping for. Now, I could have done that thing that a lot of people do when it comes to quoting things. I could have chopped off the bit that said, there's good reason to believe, because that would change the entire character of the quote and make my case much stronger, but that would essentially be a lie, and I'm not a liar, except for all the times that I've done exactly that. For instance, I've never even seen a courtroom. I don't even know what one is. So, wealthy Americans are in the mix, and it's safe to say that corporations are as well. I don't need no citation for that assertion. All well and good, but what do these entities want? Unlimited rice pudding? That's a Doctor Who reference I've been wanting to use since before I was born. And that, the last sentence, was a time travel joke. But we're not here for the subpar comedy shenanigans, are we? No. So, what do wealthy Americans and corporations want from the government? Wealthy Americans are more concerned than regular folk about budget deficits. They are more favorable to cutting social welfare programs like Social Security and healthcare. They are less favorable to providing broad educational opportunities to all. They are less willing to pay taxes and are less favorable to increasing government regulation of Wall Street firms, the healthcare industry, small business, and especially big corporations. In a nutshell then, wealthy Americans want the meat of the nut, the shell of the nut, and are disgruntled at letting the likes of you even realize there's any nut to be had at all. At this point, you may be saying to yourself, they can have lots of nuts, but they can still only vote once, which is certainly true. It is also a further demonstration of why voting is a waste of time. Wealthy Americans vote, uninhibited by the barriers to voting experienced by poor folk and/or communities of color. Wealthy Americans tend to attend campaign speeches or meetings. Well, that's all fine because almost anybody can do those things. The main difference between wealthy Americans and regular Americans is that wealthy Americans give, on average, $4,633 to political campaigns. That certainly puts the 34 cents change you let the dollar store put towards the literacy program into perspective. By virtue of their campaign contributions and political engagement, wealthy Americans are much more likely to seek access to elected officials and be granted such audiences. Their megaphone is louder than yours. What's that? You don't have a megaphone? Well, that's just because you're not working hard enough and need to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. Companies want anti-union laws, lower taxes, weak regulations, and direct subsidies. Subsidies are when the government takes your money and gives it to private corporations, a transfer of wealth from the needy to the unneeded. Let's talk about lobbying. In the article Democracy for Sale, Reed Showalter writes, "Corporate lobbying works." Evidence for this can be seen with Boeing, which reportedly received a return of $7,250 for every $1 it spent on lobbying. A $1 investment returns dividends through subsidies, receiving lucrative government contracts, or having regulations removed that hinder the pursuit of profits. Apologists for the system that allows the spending of money in lobbying say it's not just big corporations who lobby the government, altruistic groups do too, which I concede is certainly true. We're just overwhelmed with the fruits of altruistic lobbyists, aren't we? Do not think for a moment that a given lobbyist will confine themselves to lavishing one political party or another with their gobs of money. They are happy to throw cash at anybody who will further their cause and pointedly deny money to anybody who opposes their cause, which is why the leftiest of lefties you see in Congress are still right-wing neoliberal capitalists with no interest in urinating into the gravy train. Centrists who do pose a minor threat to the interests of the rich and somehow manage to break through, such as Jeremy Corbyn or Bernie Sanders, are swiftly excoriated by the media, a media who are owned by the ultra-wealthy. It seems it is easy to manipulate a public into believing that having their interests put front and center is anathema, and that having the opposite foisted upon them is ambrosia. A little callback there to the unlimited rice pudding reference. It's easy to see why policy is hardly ever in the interests of regular folks like you and me, when the only real money the government finds itself swimming in comes from corporations and the ultra-wealthy. Big Fossil is never going to back a candidate who is concerned with mitigating human-made catastrophic climate change and, in fact, will water cannon huge wads of cash to any candidate that opposes such a candidate. In the USA, the Green New Deal was always going to be a non-starter, though it did temporarily make it seem that the government had some semblance of sanity. This state of affairs is the normal operating procedure of representative democracy, a system designed from its inception to be the antithesis of true democracy where Basically, there would be no need for politics or politicians, as we would govern ourselves. Thank you for watching. Please dislike this video and do not subscribe to my channel. Mess with the metrics, that's the kinds of things I like to do.